Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Sorry about, hopefully you weren't waiting for too long. I shouldn't have been working on something 10 minutes before a meeting.
No, I was only on for maybe a minute. So
Oh,
yeah,
whew, this is
no
great.
worries at all. Yeah.
Awesome. Scott will be hopping in as well. Thank you again so much for being able to participate, and we're
Oh, yeah,
hopeful
I'm
that
happy to do it.
chapters will get excited about it. And I know you've had a lot of conversations with Scott, I'm sure, on this process and then wanting to ramp up and,
Mhm.
get this going again with the chapters. I think that Scott told me the last time we did this was back in 2020, 2021.
Oh, wow.
So we this is our first year again trying to bring it back, and so we've been able to get a bunch of resources for our chapters, and so we're excited to see how this year goes. But
Yeah.
it's always when you're kicking it off again, you're like, okay, well, what can
Yeah,
we do for next year? So we're excited to see how it goes and then how we can improve it next year.
that's great. That's really exciting. And there's you have a Hill Day coming up that's part of this, is that right? Or no?
I should know that. I think Scott,
I thought I saw something in the email from Scott, but I can't remember.
I want to say that there was,
Let's see.
because we're having the chapters work on meeting locally instead of all being up in Sacramento.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're having them schedule their own meetings. I think Scott I want to say that that day had already passed, but we're encouraging the chapters to meet with their local legislators while they're actually back home, not up in
Oh,
Sacramento.
okay. That's great.
So
That's such a good idea.
yeah, so we're giving them basically like because I want to say that day happened in the springtime. So we figured, or
Okay.
Scott had figured strategically, well, you might have a better chance of meeting them in person. You don't have to travel, all that kind of stuff. And so kind of giving it back to the chapters on, here's some resources you can use at your local level to try and get
Yeah.
meetings set up. And so we kind of gave like a try and schedule meetings this week.
Mm-hmm.
Have the automatic, I guess the waiting room on. Sorry about that. Everyone, thank you for joining in. Some people are still trickling in the waiting room, so I'm gonna give them another minute or so as I get to admit them all.
Look at all these summer people. Thankfully, nobody's wearing a tie. It's only 110 degrees out. See, Lee's somewhat recovered from her soiree down there in San Diego. That's great.
Thanks, Scott.
That was a great, great event. Why do I see the usual cast of characters on this? Jeannie, hello from Bakersfield. What was it, about 120 up there today?
I just looked when you said that. I think it's only 104 right now.
Oh, yeah.
It was hotter yesterday, but not too bad today.
All right, we'll wait a few.
107.
Oh, there you go. But it's a dry heat. All right, Sarah, now you're getting fancy on us.
Just a touch of flair.
I love it.
Give people a couple more minutes and then we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Exciting stuff. I actually like this idea of being in district. And capture them. How's the offices for the legislature coming, their $1 billion extravaganza?
So just a couple weeks ago, they started the tearing down the old building. So it is officially getting real now.
Oh, the 1960s version tacked on? Yeah.
Coming down.
Where's the governor then? Is he staying in the building or have they moved him elsewhere?
He has an office in the new swing space as well. He has the entire top floor of the new swing space right now.
What do they need? That building was gorgeous. I
The
realize it's across the street, but big deal.
Yeah, I think the plan is to use it for another state agency once the legislature moves back to this. That's why they kind of designed it more generically, so it could be used by another state agency when they're done.
I was thinking it might be cheaper just to tunnel underneath the street and let them stay over there.
Right, or like a little bridge over the street.
Yeah.
There are some tunnels that go underground near the Capitol. I think they go to the state library for sure. I'm not sure where else they go.
It's sort of like the tunnel system in Washington, DC.
But yeah, so that's starting. But right now, yeah, the governor, I think the Senate has a couple floors, and then the Assembly has about 4 floors, and then the governor has the top floor, and only his staff can get up there. You have to badge in to get to his office, which was not the way it was in the old building.
Can't
So-
just walk in and knock on the door.
Yes, it's exclusive, and he has his own elevator. So the elevators are super crowded, but he has an elevator for just himself, and he's hardly ever there. So it's just an unused elevator.
Okay, I mean, that's, I guess, kind of cool.
Yeah. And they have 2 designated for Senate and Assembly members to use. They have their own little back channels inside the building, so they don't have to walk through the regular hallways to get to committees and stuff.
Wow.
Mhm. So it's 3:05. I think we can go ahead and get started if you'd like. Sarah, if you want to go slide, and I think Scott's going to take it away.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for taking a little time out of a warm day to be with us. I think for those of you who don't know me, I've been a longtime advocate for advocacy. But I really can't speak strongly enough about why this grassroots efforts is so important for all of our chapters and our members to participate. If you remember, it allows us, our members, to speak up, to be the true voice of our profession, not just for our membership, but everybody, whether they're licensed or on the path of licensure or working within an architectural firm. And Lord knows we have a ton of issues that crop up on any given year. I know, Scott, you kept us abreast of all of the bills that the various components of our advocacy network have reviewed. But to be able to talk to these issues, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes with staff, I think it really drives home what legislators really want to hear, and that is the passion, the conviction, the expertise about how these issues affect us. So whether it's housing, and we can pick any one of the elements of housing, whether it's the issues of sustainability or resilience, whether it's the effects of taxes or the things that affect the funding for our projects, think school bond measures, all of these, the legislators have direct impact on us. So to be able to speak to these issues in district with staff or with the legislature, I think makes it a very powerful voice that resonates for our members. And remember, we're not just 10 staff people up there. There's 10,000 of us in this organization, and that's not a small voice. So I'm hoping that you all at your chapter levels will take the opportunity in the next month here to reach out, set those appointments, have some fun doing this too, because we are the ones with the positives that come forward. We don't carry a lot of negative. We don't carry political agendas. We care about the health, safety, and welfare more than anything else, and the betterment of our local environments. So with that, let's go out there and get them. All right, Scott, who's up on the deck here?
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. And like Scott said, we are very appreciative of a president who cares so much about advocacy and has made it a priority for us. And so thank you for being here, Scott. And we're going to go ahead and next pass it over to Stephanie Lamore, who is from AIA National. She is their Senior Manager for Advocacy. She's going to talk a little bit about how to get the most out of these meetings. Thank you for being here, Stephanie. You can go ahead and take it away when you're ready.
Awesome, thanks. So I do have a slide deck. I don't know if I can share that. Oh, that
You
was
should
easy.
be able to go ahead and share.
Awesome. That was so quick. Okay, there we go. Did everybody see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So thank you guys for having me, and my presentation, it's only going to be about 10 or 15 minutes because I know that your leadership has a lot of content that they want to get to, and so I want to be respectful of that. My name is Stephanie Lamore. I'm the Senior Manager for State and Local Advocacy at AIA National. I've been there a little over a year. Prior to that, I was actually at the National Society of Professional Engineers for about 3 years. So worked on a lot of the same issues, licensure, tax on services, things like that. And so came to AIA with some familiarity around some of those issues. I've been working in the advocacy space for about 13 years now, more like 15 if you include volunteer things and internships and stuff like that. So I've been around it for a while, and have managed to just kind of glean some best practices for things. And so I'm always grateful for the opportunity to share some things and answer questions when folks are looking to engage in this. So my understanding is that you're all kind of being encouraged to schedule some meetings here in the coming weeks. And so I just want to talk a little bit about how to prep for those, how to make the most of them, and how to kind of use those as a jumping off point for building relationships with the staff and with the officials that you're going to be meeting with. And so with that, I always tell people that the first step is to find your champions. Check social media posts. If you're trying to connect with folks who make floor speeches or release statements or press releases, things like that, do a little bit of digging and find the ones that are speaking positively about the issue that you want to work on. Find the lawmakers, the city councilors, the regulators who are already kind of on your team, are already on your side. Maybe they've authored or sponsored supportive legislation, things like that. And it can take a little bit of work. Social media makes it a little bit easier because most officials post just about everything that they're doing onto social media. And so if they have a statement, you'll find a link there. If they have made some kind of floor speech, or if they've made a public appearance somewhere where they've given remarks, they're likely to post that on social media too. So it can really be a rich environment for doing some research and finding those people who are going to be your champions for your issue. Next, I always tell people to make sure that you find the right staff. And so this is important, regardless of whether you're reaching out to a legislator, even somebody on city council may have staff people who are tasked with different policy areas, things like that. Even on city council, there may be, like, for example, I'm here in Falls Church, Virginia, and we have members of our city council that are tasked with leading specific policy areas. And so I know that I want to go to one person if I want to talk about housing. I want to go to somebody else if I want to talk about green spaces and urban landscape and things like that. So make sure that you're finding the right people. Make sure that you're going to the person who can help you. Of course, ideally, I know most folks really want to talk to the elected official themselves if it's possible. But again, if they have staff, their staff are often tasked with being the subject matter experts for specific policy areas. So meeting with staff, you're still meeting with somebody who can be your champion, who can advocate for you to the elected official or to the regulator. Make every effort to meet with the right person. It just streamlines the process. I've been in meetings where we thought we had the right person and didn't, and the information kind of gets passed on, but you end up having to schedule another meeting. So it's easier on your schedule, it's easier on theirs, and yeah, just kind of streamlines the whole process. And then as you're prepping to have a good meeting, I always encourage folks to take a few steps beforehand. Make sure that you're well prepared. Before you meet with a lawmaker, staffer, city councilor, take time to prepare. Research the issue that you're going to talk about, and if possible, determine how the issue affects that elected official's constituents. If you can connect those dots for them, it can be a really powerful persuader. If you're able to tell them what will happen to people in their district or city if the issue isn't resolved, or what the benefits will be if a certain, if a bill passes or if a certain code change is made or whatever it might be. But be able to connect those dots and kind of spell it out for them, make it as easy as possible for them to see, for them to get from point A to point B as far as the issue. And then I always encourage people to take time to practice your pitch. Get comfortable with the vernacular and with the ask. It's also one of the best ways to manage your nerves is to practice. If you're familiar, if you know what you want to say, and you've practiced saying it a few times, it goes a long way towards managing your nerves when you're actually in the meeting. And then finally, I always encourage folks to send information ahead of time to the person that you're meeting with. I know for a long time, leave behinds were kind of the standard practice. We'd go with our folders and, kind of share our information and then leave that information for the lawmaker or the staffer to research and to read after we had left. But more and more, what I'm hearing from folks is that staffers and lawmakers, elected officials, they prefer to get the information ahead of time so that they can also prepare for the meeting. So that if they have questions, they can come into the meeting with questions and try to get more information about the particular issue. So take time to send information ahead of time if you can, just so that they can review the issue that you want to talk about and do some meeting prep of their own. And the next, after the meeting, I always encourage folks to send a thank you. I used to encourage people to send an actual, like a note or a thank you card. And I don't know how it works in California, but I know on the Hill here in DC, it takes, I think the last statistic I heard was that it takes about 8 weeks for a piece of mail to get delivered because it goes through such intense security screening now. So maybe don't write a note, but send a thank you, send a thank you email, just thanking them for taking time to talk to you and, taking time out of their busy schedule. If they asked you questions that you didn't have the answer to, it's a great excuse to follow up also. So you can send a thank you, but then if you're able to find answers to the questions they asked, include those too. And then I also always encourage folks to stay in touch. My mantra is that the first meeting is just the first step, because really, in my mind, the goal of advocacy is not just to make your initial pitch or your initial ask. It's not even to get a regulatory change or get a bill passed, but it's to build a relationship with that office. What I really want to see is AIA members becoming the subject matter experts that lawmakers and regulators turn to when they have a question about the issues that affect the architecture profession. And if you're the first phone call they make when they're thinking about a regulatory change, or if they're wanting to put together draft legislation, that's when you really start to have some impactful influence. So stay in touch after your initial meeting. You know, if you find, for example, if there's a news story that's relevant to whatever it was that you discussed, send them a quick note and just say, hey, I happen to see this. It ties in really well with what we talked about a few weeks ago. I thought I'd send it along. I thought you might find it interesting. Those kinds of things. Just whenever you find a good excuse to touch base with them, take a little bit of time to do that. Because again, over time, as they become familiar with you, it starts to become a genuine two-way conversation where they're picking up the phone and they're calling you and they're asking questions or asking for guidance, asking for advice. And that, to my mind, is the ultimate goal, is for you guys to be the ones that they come to for advice and for guidance and for feedback. Because the best way to influence legislation is to shape it before it gets introduced. It can be done after, it's just harder. So if we can do it ahead of time, it just puts us in a much stronger position to get some of the advocacy wins that we really want. And that is the end of my part of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know if folks have any questions that I can answer. I'm happy to take a couple minutes to do that before you all move on to the next part of your agenda here.
So a quick one for you.
Mhm.
Email versus a personal thank you note, which has more impact?
I mean, I think a handwritten note has more impact if it gets there. I think that's the key, because again, I don't know what security processes are like in California. And, you know, when you're talking about city councilors, it's probably a little bit different. But on the Hill, like if you send a handwritten note to your federal representative, for example, it'll be 2 months before they see it. And by then they've kind of forgotten that they met with you and they've moved on to other things. So if it's a local official, if it's a city councilor or somebody like that, I think a handwritten note is great. If it's somebody at the state legislature, I mean, again, it really depends on how long you think it's going to take for that to be delivered. You know, if it's going to be delivered in a timely manner, then I always think a handwritten note's better. It's more personal. Yeah, but it's kind of dependent on the circumstance.
And if I can add to that, I think another benefit in this day and age of sending an electronic thank you with kind of the information you discussed is a lot of times if a legislature receives a thank you card, they receive so much mail, they'll look at it and say, oh, this is nice, and then it ends up in the trash. Whereas if you send an email and they want to recall something you discussed or want to look it back up again, sometimes having that in their email is a little bit easier for them to recall as well. Just from experience with the legislative staff, or the physical thank you cards are really nice. They like to receive them, but a lot of times they end up in the trash because you can't keep the hundreds of
Can't
papers
keep
that
them
they
all.
receive every day. So
Yeah.
sometimes for them to recall information, email is helpful for that as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good idea.
Any other questions for Stephanie? She is on East Coast time, so we don't want to make her stay all the way till the end. So if there's any questions for her now, so she has the option to get off, that would be a good time for them. Okay, it looks like there's none.
Awesome.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great.
Yeah.
And Sarah, if you can pull our PowerPoint back up again.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Have a good rest of your meeting. And if anybody has any questions that come up, I know Scott knows how to get a hold of me, so you can always just shoot me an email.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, so we will move on. Some of this is similar to things Stephanie discussed, so we'll go through it kind of quickly, but just kind of adding on a few points relevant to our state. Sarah, if you could press enter a few more times, maybe one more. Just kind of a little bit more information about kind of how to be effective with your advocacy. The first point is to know your audience. California is one of the most diverse states in our union, both by demographics and regions. For example, there are some legislatures who represent a few densely populated street blocks in places like San Francisco to members who represent more very large rural districts in the Central Valley. And those communities can have different issues and different ways of seeing things, from urban communities to rural farming and mountain communities. In addition to that, legislators can have different professional backgrounds that shape the way they think. So it is very important that you know who you're talking to when you go into these meetings and know what matters to them. Just because you know you have the right message doesn't mean that everybody's going to receive that message in the same way. So it can, like Stephanie mentioned, looking up legislators either through their website or through social media, and kind of just getting a feel for what's important to them, what matters to them, and then kind of shaping your message to kind of highlight those things so that the points are a little bit more poignant with them. And then addition to that, knowing your value added. Legislatures, senators represent 1 million people. They are lobbied by countless different groups every year with different issue areas, and it can become easier for your message to become buried if it's just a generic message. So it's important when you go into these meetings to understand the value that you add as an architect, the value you add to the conversation, and what unique parts of the equation that architects can add on the different issue areas that we're discussing. And this is kind of just a way to start establishing ourselves as leaders in these different issue areas. And then lastly, building proactive relationships is what we are doing here. It's important that you establish relationships with legislators ahead of time so that you're not just coming to them at the last minute when you need something and they have no idea who you are, they never talked to you before. So that's kind of why meetings like this are so important, because it allows you to start establishing those relationships ahead of time. They get to know you, they know what you do for the community, they know how you contribute to different issue areas so that when these issues come up, one, they either know to reach out to you for these issue areas, or when you reach out, they recall meeting with you before, they know you, they're familiar with what you do, and then they can call back upon you for those sorts of things. So that's kind of just essentially some ways to be effective with your advocacy. I think Sarah put in the chat a little bit more detailed version of that you can look at if you'd like. And then we can go ahead and move on to the next slide, which some of this Stephanie touched on, the pre-meeting checklist. So you'll want to review the issue briefs that we sent out and review the talking points as well to kind of help you guide the conversations. Review legislators' websites, and as Stephanie said, maybe add in social media to kind of get a feel for who they are, what they stand for. And Sarah put in the chat links to both the Senate and Assembly, kind of a full list of all the legislatures and an easy way to find their websites. You'll also want to decide if you have multiple people in your meeting, who will be covering what and what sections. This year we have 2 priority sections that we would like for everybody to cover, which is just the general on AI California and the equity, diversity, and inclusion, which includes our own bill. And then we have 2 optional, if there's time or whatever you prioritize for your local component, housing and climate action. So decide which of those issue groups you want to cover and who will be covering those. And then as Stephanie mentioned, relax. These meetings are, I know it can be very intimidating going to a meeting with the legislative office, but legislatures and legislative staff take hundreds and hundreds of these meetings every year. They know what to expect. They don't expect you to be experts on all of the bills you're talking about or all of the issues you're talking about. They know that you are volunteers who do other things for your daily work life. And so don't go in feeling like you have to know everything. If there are questions, it's easy for us to follow up with offices. It's a very regular answer to tell them, I do not know the answer to that at this time, but I can get you that answer. and then follow up with me, and I can get back to offices. But don't feel too tense about these meetings. They are not as intimidating as they seem. It's just a conversation, you introducing yourself, introducing the organization, what we do, and kind of talking about our priorities and how they align with the state. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, which kind of will outline the general flow of how the meetings will go. So the first part of the meeting will be the introductions. You will kind of go around the room and introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about who you are, what you do, talk a little bit about that, and just kind of talk about your relation to the district. And if you are a constituent, point that out, talk about your connection to the community. The next part is building rapport. We don't want it to just all be about us. We want to also show an interest in what offices are doing, and kind of start to build that relationship. So asking the attendee, whether it's the legislator themselves or legislative staff, about what the office's priorities are, and what they're excited to work on this year, and kind of give them an opportunity to talk a little bit about what's important to them. This can also be helpful in framing your conversation as well. You can pull little tidbits of what they say and use them later on to connect to the issues that we're talking about. And then after that, you will deliver the content, which will be the issue briefs that we sent out and we'll be talking about in a little bit. We encourage you to make them personal, and local legislators love to hear about how things relate to their district and how they relate to what they are working on. So if you have examples of how different work you've done, if you're doing the housing issue area, work you've done in the housing arena, issues you run into, or different projects that you've done in the community that they might be familiar with. But it's very effective to find ways to kind of tie it back to you, what you're doing in your practice, what your local component's doing for the district, all of those sorts of things. And then finally will be the call to action. Make sure you thank the office for giving their time graciously to you, and end by reminding them that AIA California is a resource to them. And then we have the materials for you. We have a handout that you can use. You can either send it before the meeting, like Stephanie said, or you can leave it behind with the office to review. And then right now we're going to go ahead and skip ahead. I see Noah Marty from Assemblyman Gabriel's office is here. We're going to talk about the bill that we have selected as our second priority bill, which kind of relates to both housing and climate action. So Noah is Assemblyman Gabriel's senior legislative aide, and he is going to kind of just give a quick overview of AB 529 and an update on where it's at in the process. Then if you have any quick questions for him, we will go over that. But we want to be respectful of his time, and so we will go ahead and move forward to that. And then Sarah's also going to drop in the chat the fact sheet for this bill as well from Assemblyman Gabriel's office that you can use as a resource also. Noah, thank you so much for being with us. If you want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about AB 529, we would appreciate that.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, first and foremost, thank you for supporting this bill. We greatly appreciate it. It's definitely one that's important to us this year as we kind of look at the package of housing related legislation that we've introduced. As you said, my name is Noah Marty. I'm a legislative aide with Assemblymember Gabriel's office, responsible for this piece of legislation. And so I'll, give a brief overview of kind of how we see it and kind of the reasoning behind why we chose to introduce this bill, but definitely happy if there are any brief questions, if we have time to answer them, or, if y'all have any feedback or anything for us, we're always open to solicitation on that as well. So Assembly Bill 529 was something that we've introduced with the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California, essentially looking at, how can we further assist with the utilization of adaptive reuse. We see this as, a really critical piece of the puzzle in terms of addressing our housing crisis. We recognize that there's no, a single solution that's going to solve it, but we think anything that we can do to, add additional options or additional methods that we can use to try to, add additional units to the market is something that's worth doing. And so with this piece of legislation, what we've intended to do is kind of twofold. The first piece is, requiring that HCD include adaptive reuse into its list of pro-housing, the criteria identified when looking at giving a local jurisdiction pro-housing. We felt like this was, an important step to ensure that, local governments are taking actions that would support the adoption of these projects or can help facilitate these adaptive reuse projects. And then the other piece of the legislation that we have realized in terms of, when we initially introduced it, the pro-housing piece was definitely the primary piece. But, following feedback from a lot of different organizations since introducing it, this piece has also been really important, and it's having HCD along with in consultation with the Building Standards Commission and the fire marshals to, revisit and you look for ways to update, clarify, or, change the building standards codes to better support the facilitation of adaptive reuse projects. We had a lot of different developers or different nonprofit housing organizations come to us with, challenges that they had encountered for potential projects regarding, turning existing structures using adaptive reuse, whether that was, certain issues with, certain vent sizes or just a various long laundry list of different things that they had encountered that just seemed like didn't make sense. And so we really want to, have HCD and these state agencies take a look at these to see if there are some potential things that just make sense that don't, hurt health and safety, but can be changed to better facilitate the utilization of these projects. And so that's kind of the thing that, brief overview of the bill. We felt like this was an important step to trying to, help facilitate the adoption of this really important tool to addressing our housing crisis. We've built a pretty good support coalition behind it, and the bill's been moving along very well through the process so far. The bill currently has passed out of its last policy committee last week. It is now sitting in Senate Appropriations, where we're, optimistic that we'll get it through. We're still working with HCD on a few pieces here, but I think, it's in a pretty good place, and we really appreciate the support that y'all are providing on this. But, happy to be open to any questions or, any clarifying information, or if there's anything else that you feel like you'd want to pass along to our office about this bill that I could pass along to the assembly member, happy to do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Noah. We really appreciate you being here. And we also want to just thank you on behalf of our organization for taking on this cause that is so important to us. And I know I've shared with you some of the recent victories we've had in this space when it comes to the International Existing Building Code. But for now, we want to make sure to be respectful of your time. So are there any questions for Noah on this bill?
I have a question. When will it be going to the floor if it's at appropriations now?
So in terms of the timeline, right now we're in summer recess, and so we have about a month until the legislature reconvenes. At that point in time, we'll have about 2 weeks for people to, try to work their bills that are currently in the appropriations committees and try to advocate for their passage. The appropriations is going to have its suspense hearing, which we anticipate this bill is going to go to suspense once it's referred. That will be at the end of August. And then sometime in those first 2 weeks of September are going to be when the bill is potentially going to be heard should the bill advance out of the appropriations committee.
So we would, if you're looking to get to our senators, it's time to get to them now, because it'll be coming up within 30 to 60 days for them to vote, right?
Yes, it is within that window.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, unless anybody else has a question, we will go ahead and let Noah get along with the rest of his day. But we really appreciate you being here, Noah, and thanks for taking the time. And we will be in touch as well as the bill moves forward. If you need anything from us, feel free to reach out at any time.
Certainly, and same goes to all of you. If you all need anything, or if there's anything you want to pass along to me, feel free to let me know. So thank you all so much.
Awesome, thank you. And kind of continuing on the theme of that bill, one of the reasons why we chose it for this year is one, because it is in line with both our climate goals and our housing goals, and it kind of serves the purpose for both of those issue areas. We have also in recent weeks had a big victory when it comes to the building code. The State Fire Marshal's Office put forward adding 7 additional chapters into California's existing building code that exist in the International Existing Building Code to give architects more tools when it comes to doing these adaptive reuse type projects. Prior to this, there was not a lot of support in the building code for these types of projects. And while the legislature has been passing a lot of bills dealing with adaptive reuse, the code environment hasn't necessarily been one that supports the conversion of these projects. So a lot of the projects haven't been possible up to this point. But these chapters that we just got implemented through Mike Malinowski, who did a great job of pushing for the advancement of those and has been working on them for many years, kind of culminated in this huge victory recently. So it's something that we can point to that we've done in this arena, while also talking about a bill that's going through the process on this. And I believe Sarah has a link in the chat with some more information about that code change that we just accomplished. So if you're interested in learning more about that and want to mention it in your meetings, feel free to do so as well, and kind of tie it back to the work we are doing. And then moving forward, this is kind of just the big view of the legislative process. It's a very complicated, complex process, a lot of moving parts. Where we're at right now is all of the bills are in their second house. All the bills that passed out of the original house are in the opposite house now. July 14th, just last week, was the last day for policy committees to meet to report bills out to fiscal committees. And that was also the last day of the legislature before summer recess. So for the next month, legislators will be on summer recess working back in their districts, which is why we're doing this at this time, because legislators are all back in their districts. They will reconvene from summer recess on August 14th. And then over the next few weeks over the next month, they'll be having the fiscal committees meet and report out all the bills that are currently sitting in those committees. And then for a few weeks in a row, they'll have full session every day to try to get all of the bills passed before the September 14th deadline, which is when the legislature adjourns for the year. So we can go ahead and move forward. So now we're going to discuss the 4 different issue briefs that we sent out to you all to talk about. So when we were kind of planning for this, we wanted to make sure to highlight priorities that are priorities for AI California. And so the 4 that you see in front of you are all 4 of our biggest priorities as an organization. But we also wanted to connect with the legislators' priorities as well. The legislature tends to prioritize whatever Californians prioritize. And so just this last year, the Public Policy Institute of California did a survey of California and found that the top 5 issues that Californians care about, at 29% jobs came in, but then at 14% was homelessness, 11% was housing, and then 8% was the environment. So we are in a unique position as an organization in that our priorities align with the priorities of the legislature and the priorities of California. And something that I found is I sit in a lot of meetings with different people within the building industry, and we are one of the only factions of the building industry that is pushing for these types of things. And I don't think a lot of time the legislature knows that we're out here and that they have a partner in the built environment who is pushing for the same things they're pushing for. And so that's kind of why these types of things are so important, is that we can start getting our name out there and reminding them that we are here. We can be a partner to them. We're pushing for the same types of issues they're pushing for. Additionally, for these issue briefs, we sent out talking points that kind of help give a framework for how you can discuss these issues that you can kind of use as a starting place and kind of make it your own. And like we said, add in some local components to that as well. So we'll go ahead and move. And then I also want to mention just we haven't done this for a few years, so this year is kind of more of an introductory year. We're getting our name back out there, reintroducing new legislatures to AI California, reminding them that we're here, reminding them about the issues we care about. And so that's kind of where we're at with that. So we'll move on to the first issue brief, which is kind of the top priority, which is just reminding people about the American Institute of Architects. It's just intended to educate the legislator and legislative staff about the AIA and the architectural profession. And it's also an opportunity to establish the credibility of architects, both as members of the community and as a resource to legislators. And just kind of an opportunity to remind them AIA is made up of all different types of architects, firm employees, firm owners, educators, developers, construction managers, government employees, planners, community volunteers, and we exist for the sole purpose of protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the public, which is something that is unique to the architectural profession. So it's just reminding them of that, and then reminding them that architects are on the front line of providing innovative and creative solutions to address the real world societal issues through the built environment, and that we are an important part of that process. This issue area is also an opportunity for you to highlight your local component and what you're doing locally, and kind of tie things back to their district and the work that you're doing as well. We will go ahead and move on to the next issue brief, which is equity, diversity, and inclusion. This is another priority for the legislature and the California government as a whole. I'm sure some of you are familiar with, it's even Governor Newsom's big motto that he has put on everything. It's on every governor's office employee's signature line in their email. It's California for all, which is really their focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so this is just an opportunity to let them know that we as an industry understand where there might be some gaps when it comes to this in our industry, and that we are committed to addressing those gaps and making sure that that our membership matches the communities we're serving and kind of the value of that as well. And so as part of that, we have introduced a bill this year, AB 342, which is our one sponsored bill this year, which will allow for the California Architects Board to collect demographic information from licensees and applicants. This will help us kind of get a better feel for where we're at as an industry. It will help us to identify where there's any barriers to entry, and then kind of develop strategies to help address those. This is also an opportunity for you to provide some examples of how your firm or chapter has incorporated EDI into what you do, or if you have examples of ways in which you have personally seen the benefits of EDI when it comes to design and kind of how that plays a role. This is a good opportunity to kind of personalize this issue as well, while pushing for our sponsored bill. Additionally, I believe Sarah put in the chat, and it's also in the issue briefs and the talking points, the link where you can use to see if your legislator has already voted on this. It is pretty far along in the process. It is now on the Senate floor, which is the opposite house. So it's been through all of its policy committees. It's been through all of its fiscal committees. The Assembly voted on it as a whole body on the floor already. So the last step is for the Senate as a whole to vote on it. So a lot of members have already voted on this. So you might want to check ahead of time the previous votes and see if the member you're meeting with has voted for it or not. If they have voted for it, this is an opportunity to thank them for supporting something that was a priority to us. And if they haven't voted for it, it's an opportunity to encourage them to do so when they see it come before them. And then we will go ahead and move along to the next issue brief that we have, which is climate action. And Sarah Vasquez, our climate action coordinator, is going to take the lead on this one.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Some of you, maybe most of you might know who I am. My name is Sarah Vasquez. I'm the Climate Action Program Coordinator here at AIA California. Thank you guys again so much for being here. And I'll try and make this as easy as possible to talk about climate action and what AIA California is doing and what you can use when you're having your meetings with your legislators. So back in 2021, I believe, Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, AIA California declared a climate emergency. And in that declaration, AIA California basically made a statement describing the architect's unique role in addressing climate change. Large amounts of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the building sector, whether it's construction, transportation of materials, extraction of materials. A lot of that's referred to as embodied carbon, and also just operation emissions as well. So architects have a role in the way they design buildings, the way they design communities, to address carbon reduction, decarbonization, that could benefit or mitigate climate change, and also protect climate vulnerable communities as well. And so that's something since that declaration, and I do believe before that there were other efforts as well within climate action that have helped solidify climate action to be a high priority for AIA California. We're also super active and have been especially more active in working with state legislators, or state agencies, nonprofit organizations to address climate action in the built environment. So decarbonization is huge, a big push of where AI California is doing, and other allies and like-minded organizations and state agencies are also focused on to meet some of California's carbon reduction targets. So some of the opportunities you can talk about with your legislators of what AI California has done, they're listed right here, and I'll go through them a little bit briefly. So many of you, if not all of you, are aware of the new zero net carbon design mandatory continuing education requirement that came from AB 1010, which was signed into law back in 2021, requiring architects renewing their license in California to obtain 5 hours of zero net carbon design education every two years. AI California was a sponsor of this bill. We want other architects to be educated in this area so they can make better design decisions to help address climate action and climate change. We currently are collaborating with several state agencies and other organizations like RMI, National Building Institute, several others on working with how can we take a lot of the science and a lot of the experience that we have in green building and zero net carbon design and influence our building codes to address decarbonization and embodied carbon reductions. So an example of that right now, we're working with California Green Building Code, or Cal Green, on introducing mandatory and voluntary measures on embodied carbon in the code. So we're working on that currently with DSA and the Building Standards Commission on providing, we've proposed language to update Cal Green. And so there's a hearing in August, and we're really excited to hear the results of that. But it's something we've been partnering with other organizations also. As Scott had mentioned earlier, we've introduced new chapters from the International Existing Building Code into the California Existing Building Code to promote the adaptive reuse of existing buildings, which is great, which is awesome. And we're currently planning for future code cycles. You know, we're looking into 2025 and beyond on what we can introduce to help further climate action and decarbonization in the building codes. And as Scott kind of was alluding to earlier, a lot of our work in the building code sector area is filtering through the legislative process. And so we're starting to see other people reaching out to us about bills and asking for our advice and our support. And we want that to continue. And especially if you guys are kind of in your local areas and having meetings on this topic, we can only go further in that, which is something that we're really excited to do. And I think that's pretty much it from me. And of course, if you have any other questions on these items that are specifically listed on the issue brief or the talking points, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'll do my best to help you out.
Thank you, Sarah. And as Sarah mentioned, a lot of this great work that we're doing in the code arena is filtering over into the legislative process. And I think one step of that is letting people know the great work we're doing. For instance, Noah from Assemblyman Gabriel's office, when I reached out to him and let him know about our recent victory with the International Existing Building Code, he became very interested and wants our feedback and wants to meet with us to talk about what we think are some good ideas for the bill, what we think is still needed. And so just a lot of times legislative offices don't know all this work that we're doing. And so it's a great opportunity to remind them that we are a major player in this arena and that we should be a player at the table when it comes to these conversations. And then on that note, we'll move forward to housing, which is our last issue brief. So housing, as you all know, is probably right now, I would say, the top issue in California. And it is something that everyone's talking about. The majority of our bills that we took positions on this year have to do with housing. It is a big topic. And I think as a big topic, it's a great opportunity for us as an organization, since architects do play a large role in the housing arena. And so this is an opportunity for us to establish architects as an important voice in the housing conversation and let them know that we are able to be ready and able to be at the table for important discussions. And it's also an opportunity to express our support for ongoing efforts to address California's shortage of housing. We are in the process as an organization of trying to increase our involvement in housing and kind of become a little bit more active. Our board meeting this year in-person board meeting focused largely on housing. And since then, we've taken a lot of the feedback we've gotten, and we're in the process of doing a lot of work there. So We want to continue that effort and translate it to the legislature and let them know that we are interested in the space and that we are a major player. And it's just also reminding them that because of architects' familiarity with planning policies and local political environments, expertise in design and building performance, and knowledge of construction materials and methodologies, that you all are very uniquely equipped and experienced to help address the housing need in the state, and do have valuable feedback to give on bills when they're going through the process, and on other things that come up. And so that is kind of the essence of the housing issue area, and why we are focusing on that, and kind of some of the things to talk about and make it local. So that's that issue area. And then we can go ahead and move forward to the last couple of points, and then we'll take questions generally on everything that's been covered. So at the end of the meeting, we want to leave an impression. Kind of the main point that we're trying to bring forward this year as our first year back is reminding them that they have a partner in the built environment. And as we mentioned, the architects are on the front line of providing innovative and creative solutions to address real world societal issues and problems through the built environment. A lot of times architects are the ones who take the bills they pass and figure out how to implement them and make them work and come up with the innovative solutions. And so it's just reminding them that we are an important part of the process, and that if they don't have another partner in the built environment who's pushing for these things, they have us, and they should be coming to us when they have questions or when they need support on certain things. So that's kind of the main impression that we want to leave. We also have the handout that we have created that you can leave behind with them or send ahead, so they can kind of remember all the points that you covered as well. Then move forward one screen, please, Sarah. So I just kind of want to go over some last minute do's and don'ts for the meetings. So in the do column, make it personal, local. We've talked about this many times, related to the district, related to what they're working on. Let them know what you're doing, what your component's doing. Tailor the message to the audience. We talked about that already. Be prepared, kind of look over all the materials before you go in and be ready to discuss them. This is a given. Be friendly and professional. Like Scott said at the beginning, have fun. Don't put too much stress on this. This is meant to be a relationship building activity, supporting your profession. It should be something that you're having fun with. Bring business cards or leave behind papers with you if the meeting's in person. If it's virtual, have those ready to send to them. And then follow up, as Stephanie said, follow up with a thank you. And I believe we do have the sample thank you letter that we're putting in the chat that you can use to send. You can figure out how you'd like to do that by your component. If you want one person to be assigned to send the thank you letters, your component executive should have the contact they use to schedule the meeting, so you can usually send it through them. Or if you get the card of the person that you meet with, you can send it directly to them as well. But just kind of establishing amongst yourself how you want that to work. In the do not column, we encourage people not to get into debates or arguments with the office, and not to let your bias show. Whether or not somebody's a Republican or a Democrat, you never know down the road who you're going to need to work with. So it's important that we as an organization maintain relationships, positive relationships with everyone that we meet with. So stick to the issues and the facts of the issues, and try not to get into debates or arguments with offices. And don't feel like you have to answer every question. We've covered this already. They don't expect you to know the answers to all of their questions. They expect you to sometimes say, we'll check with our government relations person and get back to you. That's a common answer. That's not a wrong thing to say. So don't feel like you have to have an answer to everything. Don't go over the allotted time that they've given you. You don't want to be that organization that doesn't respect the time frame that they gave you and make staff have to go in and try to wrap up the meeting. I've been on the other end of that many times, and it does not leave a positive taste in staffers' mouth if you are the organization that does that to them. Legislators have very busy schedules, and they oftentimes are hopping from one thing to the next. So make sure you watch the time and stick to the window that they've given you. And then finally, we've covered this already. Don't stress out. Have fun with it. So I think that's, oh, and then I think Scott has mentioned this in the chat. We are working on a survey that we're going to send out to you all to follow up on the meetings, so you can kind of get feedback to us. Let us know who you met with, what was discussed, if there was any questions. we'll have a survey that you can fill out to give us all that information, and we can either follow up or help you with the follow up to those meetings as well. So there will be a feedback loop, and we'll work on getting those links out within the next week.
Geez, I better come up with a prize then for the folks that get their ducks in a row.
Yes, absolutely. And I think now we will have time for questions. If anybody has questions just about anything that's been discussed or about the meetings, we have some time for that now.
I have a question. Since the two bills that you want us, at least the adaptive reuse started in the assembly, you basically, it's most important for us to talk to senators, right? Because they're the ones who will be voting on it next. The assembly people have basically already voted on it, right?
Yes, for the two bills, yes, that is correct. They are the ones who still have to vote on it. I believe in the case of the 529, I believe it has, let me see if it was, okay. That is correct. The Senate will be still voting on them, although it is also an opportunity when you meet with the Assembly people to thank them if they supported the bill, which I believe must have. Yeah, and so that we know we're not just always asking for something, but we also are appreciative when they do support us.
Okay, that's a good idea.
I think Brian has his hand up.
Yeah, a couple things. The first speaker, or I'm sorry, it came on a little late, but the woman from Washington, D.C. Was talking about not doing leave behinds, but then it was mentioned in in the last slide. Do you think we should do both? Mainly, get ahead of ourselves and send stuff, and then also leave some things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good practice. Then they can have something in front of them during the meeting, and then something to leave behind as well. Okay, and then the other question I have is, we've got several different chapters represented here today, right? And we have the luxury here in Sacramento of actually being able to go in person. I guess, and I don't know if this was discussed, probably not in the beginning, but I think we need to probably have a group meeting and put a groups together and then decide our strategy and all that stuff. So that's the next step for us. Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Meeting together and strategizing who's going to talk about what you want to talk about. That's a great next step. Okay. Thanks, Scott and staff. Absolutely. Thank you, Brian.
And Scott, generally the meetings, I mean, in terms of the time they would allot, they're not going to allot more than say 20 or 30 minutes to meet with us, right?
That's correct. The average is about 30-minute allotment, but most meetings end before that. But sometimes, yeah, so I would say between 15 and 30 minutes is what you should aim for.
Okay. And we would prefer for these meetings to be in person now that we can all meet in person, right? I mean, because a couple of years ago, we had to do it virtually. So Central Valley chapter, we did do that virtually, but since it's best to be, if we're trying to form relationships, to be in person, right?
Yeah, in-person meetings are a little bit more memorable. You have the more natural connection and interaction, but it's still some legislatures still prefer virtual meetings and some prefer in person. So it kind of just depends on what the office prefers. But I think most people prefer the connection that you get with in-person meetings.
Right, and you know that in the Central Valley chapter, we have geographically a large area.
Right.
And I know that, the thing was to go meet in their to meet in their district offices. Well, the district offices for our 17 counties go all the way up to Reading. So
Right.
I'm not driving to Reading in 108-degree heat to meet in the district office. But when they come back on August 14th, is it okay for some of these meetings if we decide to do them in the Capitol offices, if we can get in?
Yeah, I think that if that works out for you and they're willing to take those meetings, I think that you'll want to do it probably towards the beginning of when they come back, because things are gonna be moving
right.
pretty rapidly once they get back, but and I
Right,
would say
they'll be,
their schedules are
Yeah.
probably gonna be pretty busy, but if you can make it happen.
right, that's a good point, because they need to really jam in that 1 month to get stuff done, so, got it.
Absolutely. Anybody else have any questions? Also, I'll mention if there's any other questions that come up after the call, feel free to reach out to me by email. I'm happy to answer any questions or help with anything that I can. All right, it looks like there are no other questions. I think you should all have my contact information. Feel free to reach out. We'll also send out most of the documents that we put into the chat today have been sent out already, but we will send those all out as well to make sure everybody has those moving forward also. Look forward to hearing how all of your meetings go, and happy to help however I can. Thank you all for being willing to participate as well. We appreciate it. This is, as been mentioned many times, a very important thing that we do. And as we're looking to build our voice in Sacramento and kind of create these proactive relationships, this is one of the essential steps for us to do that. So what you're doing is very helpful for us and for your chapter, so we appreciate the participation. Awesome. Well, seeing no other question. Desiree, did you have a question?
No, I just said thank you. And to
Okay.
Sarah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have fun next week.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.